Welcome to Two Bees in a Pod. I am Bilola.
And I am B. Leonga, and this is a podcast about immigrant experiences in the U.S., sharing our perspectives on various topics,
Including straddling cultures, fitting in, staying connected, learning and unlearning the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Welcome to another episode of Two Bees in a Pod. This is our penultimate episode for season 2. We have one more after this, and then we'll be taking a break of an undetermined amount of time, but rest assured we'll be back at some point in 2025 if DJT has not revoked our citizenship and deported us. Anyway, let's not go off on that tangent just so soon. This episode we're going to be reviewing our November book of the month, which is Arrow of God by Chinua Achebe. Why does your own look so fancy? Is it hard?
It's a hardcover, but it's also a trilogy, so it's all three books.
Nice. Okay, I need to reread No Longer at Ease. I think I liked that one better than this, but
I think I did. Yes.
yeah.
It was a little bit modern when I read it. I think
Yeah.
it's in the 60s. It's set
It
in the
is.
60s.
Yeah, so just for our listeners, Things Fall Apart, Arrow of God, and No Longer at Ease is a trilogy, right? Things
Yeah.
Fall Apart was written first, but this is the prequel, which was written
Yeah.
after it, but the story comes before, and then the third one is No Longer at Ease. So if you're interested in reading, all three of them, there you have it. So our icebreaker today, the question is, what's a native spiritual belief that you low-key or high-key believe in? And it could be like native to you, your tribe, Cameroon, or native to somewhere else.
I don't know if it's belief, but it's just that I'm used to it. My grandfather could finish you if you were sweeping at night. So even like sometimes I sweep at night, but in the back of my head, I'm like, if my grandfather catches me, I don't know what the reason behind something about sweeping your destiny. I have no
Yeah.
idea. But I just know that my grandfather used to get really upset if you were sweeping at night or whistling. Whistling was
Yes.
another one. Walking by a graveyard. In college, I remember going with a friend. We went somewhere and we're walking back at midnight, and she wanted us to take a shortcut through the graveyard, and I looked at her like, do you know where I'm from? Why do you think I will be in a graveyard at midnight? I think there's a superstition that at night the dead come out to play or whatever it is. But I'll mess with graveyards, and I'm definitely not walking through anybody's graveyard at night.
I mean, I feel like that's a global belief now or superstition, but I will say this, not at night, but I do enjoy walking through cemeteries.
I have a
couple
friend
months
for
ago, yeah?
My sister absolutely enjoys. She goes to places to visit cemeteries.
They're so beautiful to me. And Houston has some historic ones. There's some historic Black cemeteries, and then just historic cemeteries in general in Houston. And I just love it. I find them so peaceful. I like, looking at the headstones. I just like, what was your life like? Why did you die at 28 years old? I really enjoy it now. Would I do that at night? Absolutely not, because I do believe that the spirits are dancing, at that time. But yeah, I like those walks.
I do. So there's a cemetery, like a really small cemetery on my way to the library, and sometimes I walk to the library. And I told somebody that every time I walk past the cemetery, I say hi. I just feel like, I just say hi. I'm walking past them, like, hey guys, I hope you guys are resting in peace, I hope people are visiting you. I just feel like I should talk to them. I don't know why. It's a strange thing that I do. But I think it's also because after my friend died, I think that was the first time I really went to a cemetery in America, and like I've gone to visit since then. And so it's like I feel like I should talk to them. Like, okay, they're dead, but
Yeah.
I can't explain it. But yeah, so I always say hi when I'm walking past the cemetery.
So a native spiritual belief that I believe. So Lake Neos, right? It's for the listeners. I'm not gonna take us down a rabbit hole, but in the 80s, I don't know the year. It was 80s.
85 or 86.
Okay.
86.
I don't know why I thought it was because I have a distinct memory of learning about that incident and then like crying as if I knew the people that had died. I swear to God. When I learned that, that's why like I thought that it happened in the 90s because when I learned about it was in the 90s and I got so upset. Anyway, it's what is dubbed, if you Google killer lakes, they're not unique to Cameroon, but they are lakes that form in volcanic craters. They have poisonous gas that is trapped beneath the layers of water, and when they are disturbed, then that gas is released. It's
Oxide.
carbon dioxide is released and it kills. There's so much of it, and carbon dioxide, of course, is more dense than oxygen. So it kills all the plants and animal life that are within a certain range. And historically, in some of those incidents, like the range of the gaseous explosion has been quite far. So in the Lake Nyos disaster, people who were sleeping, in their huts, animals who were tied up outside, like, and you kind of die we'll call it peaceful death because you just,
You don't know, you just suffocate and die.
yeah, exactly. If you were conscious or if you were not asleep, you would probably feel like lightheaded and then feel like you were falling asleep, and then, you would just eventually die from carbon dioxide poisoning or suffocation. But I'm taking a long time to say that the people who live around this lake, traditionally in Cameroon and probably in other parts, I think there's one also in
In the
either
Western.
Democratic Republic of Congo or Central Africa. There's another country that has one of these killer lakes. And traditionally in the past, the people have believed that this phenomenon is caused by evil spirits, right? Or malicious gods, malefic gods that live in these bodies of water. And I know the scientific explanation, obviously, but I still buy into that spiritual aspect of it. I don't think the two are contradictory in my head. You know what I mean? Like, I still low-key believe that there's some spirits in the lake that, are manifesting these phenomena, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I think for Lake Nyos, because it's close, I agree with what you say, because Lake Nyos is close to Lake Oku, and growing up there's so many stories they told about Lake Oku and like supernatural powers and strange things that happen with Lake Oku, so I can see that.
Yeah, but yeah, no, there's a perfectly rational, logical, scientific explanation to these events. They're just gaseous explosion. Limnic eruption is what it's called.
It's called,
Limnic
yes.
eruption, yeah. But obviously, back in the day, people did not, like anything, people did not know the reason behind it. They attributed it to these malefic gods and spirits.
It's funny because I just looked it up, and there's another lake in Cameroon that had one 2 years prior to Lake Nyos. So in '84, Lake Munun, which is in the Western Province, and I think there's somewhere between Fumbot and Fumban, and it's also like a crater lake. It had an error, but it wasn't as bad as Lake Nyos, because Lake Nyos, it says 1,746 people died. In Lake Munun, it was 30 something people.
Yeah, I made a TikTok video about this. It's probably been like 3 or 4 years now. But what's interesting is that I believe it was in Lake Nyos, they had migrants who I think over generations had moved from different parts of Cameroon. I think cattle rearers more so. And they settled down by the lake. But the people who had ancestrally been from that area, they knew to build their houses on higher elevation. They had probably not been passed down the reason for this, but they did. And when that limnic eruption happened, of course, because carbon dioxide is more dense than oxygen, the people who are at the lake level were killed. And if you were on higher elevation, you had a better chance of survival.
Yeah, because they say 3,500 cattle or livestock died. And looking at the pictures, you just see all these cows like lying in the grass. Dead. And that's true though. For like natural disasters in Houston, they always used to say every year that there's no hurricane, there are people moving to Houston who have no idea how to function in a hurricane. And that's why like we would always do safety moments at work talking about hurricane season. Like it feels repetitive, but there are people who have moved since the last hurricane and who have no idea how bad it can get.
And yeah, and just think like if it happened more infrequently and there was no technology where this was recorded. It's that kind of situation where the newer people, you're like, oh yeah, I'm just gonna go have a little lakeshore residence, not knowing.
Or by the bayou. Or go living in like Richmond by the Brazos River, not knowing you can end up inside your house every time it rains in Houston.
Yeah. So, but yeah, I low key, high key, buy into those lake spirits. I like the lore.
This is the sidebar. I've already started. I read something, maybe watched a video where somebody said, can we think of how many people, courtiers in olden days, they said like before the kings or royalty ate, somebody had to taste the food to make sure it wasn't poison. They said, think about how many people died because they were allergic.
Imagine you had to taste granite stew for the chief. Are you allergic to pig?
Kill the cook, then the cook poisoned the food. Meanwhile, it's an Atlantic shock.
Are you allergic to shellfish and there's guys? It's hilarious. Anyway, what's the synopsis of Arrow of God? So it is set in colonial era Nigeria in the 1920s. And for those who are not familiar, Nigeria was colonized by Great Britain. So it's set during that era in the 1920s. And it's really a story that demonstrates or talks about the impacts of colonization on native culture, specifically Igbo culture. In this instance, their tradition, their spiritual beliefs, as well as their, societal structures. It centers around a Zulu who is the chief priest of a group of Igbo villages. It's Eze Ulu. Eze means priest of Ulu, who is the god. Right? And this is a polytheistic spiritual belief system. So Ulu is like the big god, but then there are also kind of lower gods. So Ezulu, yes. Ezulu is like the priest
big one
of that big god, yeah. So the story follows him, his family, and how he deals with this reality, right, of the colonial invasion and the decisions that he has to make to ensure the best survival for his people and his community, and how his decisions kind of lead to conflicts amongst his village people, between him and his village people, I should say. So in the story, the people of Umuaro, which is the specific village that Izulu lives in, right? Because there are other villages that make up.
I think there's 6 of them, right?
Yeah. So for most of the novel, it seems like he's not on very good terms with the people of his village, or they kind of they're side-eyeing him, for most of the story for different reasons. So one reason is that he's the chief priest of Ulu, but one of his sons is attending the Christian mission school. So that's already a contradiction. And as you can imagine, a lot of people have some resentment towards the Christian mission and the colonial administration. So the fact that the chief priest is sending his son to go and learn about this white man's God and his ways, it seems contradictory to them, but he has his own rationale why he sent Oduche, his son, to go and learn about Christianity.
Keep your friends close and keep your enemies closer.
Yeah, that's his right. And he explains it multiple times throughout the novel. He's and he tells his son, I sent you there to go and be my eyes and ears. Now, that was risky because you're sending someone to go and learn a different belief system. You're hoping that they're not going to actually buy into that belief system, which is what it seems like ends up happening, right?
Yeah. I mean, the child was not sharp. You were not supposed to be learning what they were teaching you. He was just supposed to listen and come back and say, today, this is what they said. He now went and did, teacher's pets, best in Christianity. That's not why they sent you there. He lacks for he
forgot. He lost the plot. He lost sight of the mission.
Completely. It's like he went to class and was like, please sir, I said. Every time they ask a question, that's not why you were there.
I don't know if it's all Igbo people or just this particular set of villages. The python is sacred to them, right? Pythons are sacred to them. You're not supposed to kill pythons. You're not supposed to harm them. And when, of course, the Christian missionaries come and, the Nigerian, because I believe it was Nigerian missionaries who were teaching them in that school. It wasn't like white. The catechist was Nigerian, right?
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, and the teacher too. So they're kind of, doing everything in their power to convince their converts that this python that they're, what's the word? Not deifying, but
It's a totem of the god. I think in their particular village, the python is a totem of Idemili, who is the smaller god or smaller in power. And so,
okay.
yeah, I don't think that it's a god, but it's a totem of the god, if that makes sense. Like the god is in the python.
But it's definitely a sacred animal that,
I would never have survived in that. They would have died at birth.
So there's some, not a directive that is given by the Christian teachers, but they're like, basically tell them like, hey, don't be scared of the python. If you actually want to show that you're a real Christian, you should kill the python. And in their traditional, belief system, if you kill a python, then you're bringing on the wrath of that god. So now the Christian missionaries are telling them, like, if you really want to show that you're a powerful Christian, go ahead and kill a python. So that's why now Oduche carries it on his head that he's going to kill a python to prove that he's a good Christian boy. But he kind of like loses courage and he's like, okay,
chickens out.
He's like, I'm not going to kill it. I'm just going to trap it in a box and it will like starve to death. Yeah. And, mission accomplished either way. Unfortunately for him, they discovered the python in the box in his room, and of course everybody's scandalized because they're like, you're literally the son, and they're looking at Izulu like, what the hell? So Oduche, I don't know where he ranks amongst Izulu's sons. Is he the youngest?
No, the youngest is Nwafo, the one who was always around him. He's the youngest wife's son. Yes, Nwafo. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the youngest. So I think Oduche is somewhere in the middle because Idogo is the oldest son. Then you have Obika. And then you have Oduche.
Yeah. So Izulu, he seems to have this, I don't know, it's not a preferential relationship with some of his sons, but he definitely does not favor Idogo, who is the oldest. And Idogo has this kind of resentment towards his brothers because he knows that despite being the oldest, he's not his father's favorite. He doesn't see himself inheriting that priesthood from his dad, which even though you're the oldest son, it doesn't guarantee that you'll be the one to inherit the priesthood. So he's kind of struggling, with this feeling of that he's not good enough for his dad. And I think Izulu too does not really rate him that way.
Like the very first interaction, he used one of those proverbs where he asked him a question about, I hear you are now carving our gods, like don't you know that is a thing? And then by the time Idogo wants to answer, it's like, you're still here. I moved on from this conversation.
Izulu is quite mean. He's quite a mean man.
Mean
like
to
the way
everybody.
The way he talks to his wives. Talk about, I'll slap the spit out of your mouth. Like the way he talks to his wives and his kids.
Because it's like he doesn't seem to respect Idogo. But then you have Obika, who has anger issues and is always ready to throw hands and drinks to the point of stupor. And is always trying to tell Obika that, you always have the cowardly man pointing to where the tough guy used to be, because the tough guy has gone and toughed until they died. And trying to like, hey, be more like the cowardly one so you can stay alive. And in that he's like, be more like your brother Idogo. But he never like gives any kind of affirmation. I'm using new age terms. But just anything to this. He never gives Idogo anything like, I respect you, or like there are things about your character that I would like your brother to emulate.
And I feel like he doesn't even put all the responsibility on Obika that he should have, because he's still blaming Obika's best friend for getting him drunk. He's like, no, your son likes to drink. He's a drunkard. That's why he has drunkard friends. It's not the friends that are leading him astray.
Yeah.
So I feel like in that sense, he definitely is a little too soft on Obika compared to like Idogo.
Maybe he's afraid. Because
True.
remember, they told us Obika went and whooped his sister's abusive husband, and then
True.
not only beat him up, brought him at a quarter to death and brought the body back to the home.
We'll talk about that. We'll talk about that later on in the episode. But Ezulu is like, I'm assuming most men who can afford it in that society in a polygamous family, right? So he has multiple.
Is
What?
it afford? Is it afford, or is it your status in the society? I don't think it's a case of affordability.
No, but you cannot be a man with high status who's poor. Where would the yams come from to feed your many wives and children?
Their wives and children will go to a farm and work farm. What do you mean by where the yams come from?
But that's still a way of affording. Anyway, he has a big
Yeah.
compound with multiple wives.
Yeah. There were
And,
2 wives at the time. One had the oldest wife had died.
and you know what? I really don't. Matefi, right? So
Yes.
now that the oldest wife died, she's now the most senior wife. And they really paint her in this. I feel like it's a trope. It's a trope in stories about, polygamous homes. Like the oldest wife is mean and she kind of bullies the younger wives and she's jealous of the younger wife. It's such a trope and he really plays into it in this novel. I don't like it.
Is it a trope or is it reality?
Okay, but think about it, right?
It might come across as mean. I want to use just an analogy of like older siblings, right? How siblings meet different versions of their parents. Like your parents, maybe they were bright and sprightly when they had you, the older siblings, so they were out here disciplining them. And then by the time they had their retirement mistake, they don't have energy to whooping ass anymore. And they've gone soft. And I think that tends to happen with, it could happen in either way. Because they're polygamous homes where the older wife came when the man, was he was wealthy and like he had good fortune. And then by the time the youngest wife came, he's he's now at the other end of the spectrum where things are going rough, and then that wife tends to have it rough. Hopefully the older ones will look down with her, but in most cases it's like the oldest wife has been through things and there's resentment when the younger wives come in and maybe they feel like their kids are getting favored or their kids are getting things that their own children did not get. And so yeah, because at the end of the day, I think in polygamy there's only one winner, the man. There are ways that the women can win, but it's always the women don't have. It's like fate has dealt you a hand that you don't really have a say. Men would tell that, oh, I asked her for permission. If she said no, you probably just go and cheat or keep the other woman outside. She said yes. She still now has to deal with the politics of the situation. It's a lose-lose situation for the women in most cases.
Yeah, and that's why I feel like I just don't like that they did not give Matefi any like empathy or see things, tell a little bit of the story from her perspective. Because to your point, in many of the cases, they have been with the husband when he was less prosperous and, probably younger, less emotionally intelligent, if those kind of men even develop any more emotional intelligence. But if they did, it certainly was not during their first marriage, right? So she has borne the brunt of certain things. And then as the first or more senior wife, there will always be certain responsibilities, right? On her, in that family, in that household. So it's like, to your point, it's almost like eldest child syndrome, where you have all of these responsibilities and the younger wives are kind of, not only are they more, favored by the husband because they're younger, and they even said in this book that Matefi could no longer have children. So he wasn't even it seemed like he wasn't even bothering to sleep with her anymore. So I just did not like that the book played into that trope of the older, bitter, jealous first wife, because the story is rarely told from the perspective of that woman.
Yeah, and even the way her daughter is presented when she's giving food and like upset that Mwafo and Obiageli it was Mwafo who ate the food, and then she makes a comment about that's what happens when your mother cannot cook and spends all her money buying ivory.
So that shows throwing shade. So, like we said, this novel is set in 1920s colonial era Nigeria, and the story is mostly told from Ezulu's, kind of POV, but we also go to Captain Winterbottom, aka Winterbota. as the native people called him. And then Clark, who is like a junior, colonial administrator, and what's the other one? Wright. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, so we get to read the perspective of Winterbottom, who is the, the most senior administrator in that area, and Clark, who is another junior administrator. And I found it really interesting when they were talking about appointing a paramount chief, because we've had this discussion before, right? The British practice in their colonies was to rule through indirect rule. So they would either use existing leaders to administer to the people indirectly, or they would just simply appoint somebody that was favorable to them. And Winterbottom made a comment how in this part of Nigeria, they did not have a centralized authority system, right? Like you talked about this before, how in the north, they have central authority, right? They have different towns, cities, villages, but they all kind of report up to I don't know,
emir, the emir.
Exactly. But they made a comment in the novel how the Igbo people were not like that. Like they were decentralized. Every tribe, village had their own chief and their own native authority structure, which made it more difficult for the British to implement their indirect rule, which is why Winterbottom is given this directive like, hey, you have to appoint a paramount chief, which you're introducing a structure that does not exist, in that society. And of course, it's going to be disruptive, maybe not for you, the colonial administrator, but it's going to be very disruptive for the people, because it's like, who are you? And I mentioned this before also with the Bakweri people. Bakweri people had a similar, from what I've read, this concept of a paramount chief did not exist prior to British administration. Yeah, it was more, kind of decentralized villages. Yes, they, traded and had treaties and agreements and all of this, and wars and disagreements, but there was no central authority figure that was introduced by the British, and we see it happening here in this novel.
I feel like Bakri is the last. You guys have the last standing paramount chiefs in Cameroon? Because I don't know any other place where there's a paramount chief other than in. What was Chief Endele? Paramount chief of what? Boya? No.
It's paramount chief of the Bakri villages now, the Bakri people.
Let's see. And was it? I thought it was like
our paramount chief. Is he not here in America? The new one.
The new one.
I think he lives in Minnesota.
Okay, so I guess it's the paramount. They consider a paramount chief of Boya, but it's supposed to be the leader of all the Bakri. Well, it's the leader of all the Bakris in Boya. So maybe there's like a paramount chief of Limbe or Bimbia.
I don't know, to be honest.
When I was in school, we had a chief. His father died, so like he was in Lower Sith, and then during third term break, his dad passed away, and they made him the phone. I said this before. It was a phone of Babisi, and he came back to school as a phone. Like, so he wore his uniform. I think he didn't tuck in. He wore a black cap, because most of the tribes in the Northwest, they wear black hats. So he wore his black hat. He had a chinda. So somebody who came to school for the sole purpose of taking care of him. And then they fired a teacher, actually, because I don't know if you guys did this in Seka. When the teacher came to class, we'll stand up to greet. And so he didn't have to do that. And the teacher came to class and got into it and was like trying to like hustle him because he didn't stand up, and they fired the teacher.
That's what you deserve. I'm sorry, but you have to respect, native rulers. What do you mean? Was the teacher from the Northwest?
The man he was not in that school. He was a new hire. It didn't last long.
There you go. I don't feel bad for him, please.
But I think that's interesting, because this was a Catholic school, and so having all of this, like, at least they gave him respect, right? With working hand in hand with the traditional ruler, I think that's great. That's what should have happened in the beginning.
So Winterbottom, is thinking of who he can appoint as a paramount chief, and he decides that he's going to appoint a Zulu, who is the chief priest, which, I mean, I'm not even Igbo, and I can already see why that's a problem. It's like, this guy is not the chief of the people. He has a very specific spiritual role. Like, why would you pick him? And Winterbottom picks him because there was a land dispute between Umora and another village. And Ezulu was the only person who gave witness against his own village in that land dispute. So Winterbottom kind of sees him as a man with integrity. And so that's why he's like, okay, I'm going to appoint him the paramount chief.
Like I was saying before, like you look at some of these land conflicts and you see people fighting over land 100 years later, and you're wondering, like it doesn't even make sense anymore. But there's historical context that may have gotten lost in translation or over time. People don't even remember, but they just know that these two villages don't get along. And I used an example of Chimamanda Adichie has been very, very vocal about the fact that she says there's a billionaire from a neighboring village who has been trying to take over their ancestral land in her village, and they've been going to court and going through all of this. And she talked about it, especially when her dad passed away, because her father was like instrumental in her village fighting against this billionaire.
That's interesting. So what's his claim to the land? What's the claim that he's trying to make?
He has money. He can buy it. He can buy out who needs to be bought.
Word. I mean, that's pretty straightforward.
I don't know. I'm just assuming because it's very particular. She always says a billionaire from a neighboring village, and I know that it's ancestral land in her village and they've been going at it. But because he has money, I think that he's able to buy the powers that be. But her and people in her village obviously are not backing down, and they're ready to keep fighting as long as they can.
So what were the impacts of British indirect rule, right? We've already talked about it. Like in many cases, the leaders who are already in power may not have, been willing to work with the British. So they would override their authority and put somebody else who was more, amicable to the British. Again, this is just disrupting traditional structures that existed. And I gave the example of how this academic paper that I read, how this happened in Limbe, Victoria at the time, how they made somebody a paramount chief. I don't think the title was paramount chief. It was some kind of administrative position. I'm really forgetting the title now, but it was essentially that, making him ruler over, other smaller villages, and he ended up consolidating a lot of land that, has passed down to his family even to this day. So maybe the people of Limbe need to start their own land disputes to claim ancestral lands.
But yeah, like this indirect rule, it says a lot about the British people, especially because they came in no desire to learn about the societies that they were ruling, and they definitely saw every practice and custom as inferior and primitive. I think that while the local people looked at it with like a little bit of distrust and disdain because it was unfamiliar, the British colonialists, on the other hand, everything was like primitive, and why are you doing that, and like why would you do that? And because I think that it might have worked better if they had understood the lay of the land and try to figure out, because I think that where indirect rule was very effective in the northern Islamic states, because it's a very central system. You have the power, the emir at the top, and it goes down to the bottom. They did not take that into consideration when they came to the southeast Nigeria, and it's little groups, like every umuna or every little village, and they have their own structure. And they did not take, I think they just saw this land that they've now called Nigeria as one place, but it was not a monolithic society, and they did not take that into consideration. And this is what brought a lot of the struggle and conflict and strike in the little villages, and also in the country as you see it today, because it sipped into the larger fabric of how they set up the country that is Nigeria today.
Yeah, like people who really had no business, you have joined them and told them, okay, you're one country, and then see you later. You guys have to figure out how you're going to set up your government, and that, like you said, it has resulted in decades and decades of conflict because it's artificial.
Yeah.
Same thing with Cameroon.
Yeah.
It's like by force, all of people are brothers now. Figure it out. That's basically what happened.
I think Cameroon's one is even more interesting when you consider how they just split up the country after the First World War without any cause for who belongs where, right? If you go to like Chang and Lebialem, where Chang is on the Francophone side, Lebialem is on the English side, but there's so many similarities between these two cultures, and then suddenly they were in two different areas, and over time it's like, yeah, there's like French is more dominant on one side, but if you go back in time, there's so much more that they had in common. Or you have families where, why am I talking about you have families? My great grandfather was from Chang, and when he left Chang, it was during German colonial rule. So it's like they're speaking the native language and then they're speaking German, I guess, or Dutch. Then he settles in Kumba. And after First World War, Kumba now becomes English speaking Cameroon. And now he's speaking English and his family grows up there. But you have the family that they left behind in Chang. And so there's some of the family that is Francophone and some of the family that is English speaking.
Yeah, and then remember how Flo Ngala, who we had on the show,
Yeah.
she was talking about how her mom's side and her dad's side literally is just across the border of Cameroon and Nigeria. And again, just this kind of arbitrary split, not taking into account, like, are these the same people? You know? Yeah, it's really wild when you think about it. But like you said, and you can read from the point of view from Winterbottom and Clark, like
Clark.
they speak with such irreverence,
Yeah.
when talking about, like, they call a Zulu a fetish priest. Like, they speak very disparagingly, about him, about the native traditions. I think they were passing, Clark and Wright were passing on a road one time and they saw a sacrifice that somebody had left, which, was tradition. I think they had left like 2 chickens, something else. And then there was a British coin also left as part of the sacrifice. And Wright was like, how dare they, put the head of King George in this, their native rubbish. And he went and took the coin. And even Clark in his head was like, that's mad disrespectful to be desecrating somebody's sacrifice. Even his fellow colonizer was like, bruh, that's overstepping it. But yeah, they just really had no respect, which is why he would even think that's a good idea to suggest to a Zulu that he could be, quote unquote, a paramount chief when that concept didn't even exist.
Yeah, and then you have places, maybe not in like Igbo land, but I think like in the south of Nigeria, like in the Niger Delta area, there's so many people with English last names where it's from, again, one of those things where you can draw a straight line to colonialism. Maybe they embrace Christianity, and there are people that their families were told that maybe their names tied to like a god of something. And so when Christianity came, the families changed their name because, the name was like worshipping or adoring a false god. And so you change your whole identity, even though, as we know, most of our names have meaning. Like, they're not just like drawn out, there's like a meaning behind the name, which is something that I take very seriously, because I always say whenever somebody calls your name, they're putting out whatever that energy or vibe or whatever the intent, they're manifesting of sorts, right? Like, you call a name, you're manifesting, which is why I have a personal problem with all the Jadens and Aidens and Patons in our community.
Why?
What does it mean? Mine is the Cameroonian Patons and Aidens and Jadens, because we have like a whole generation of them currently today, and it's just, we have the opportunity to give names to our children that mean something where we're from. I always say on the flip side, wherever, if Jaden is Irish or wherever it's from, an Irish person is never going to give a Bakure name or a Bali name or a Banson name. So it's like, why are we giving these names? Like, is the meaning? I said, okay, if it means something, take that meaning, call somebody in your family who is older and speaks the language and let them give you a name that is close to that. That's me, but that's just, I'm a little bit militant about it. I have very strong feelings, though I don't know why I can't explain it. But yes, that's just.
I disagree because Peyton, Jaden, and Aiden are growing up in America. They're American children. You, the parent, you might be Cameroonian, and your children, they are part Cameroonian. I don't care if both of their parents are Cameroonian. If they're born and raised in America, those are American children. let them have that part of their culture. You can give them their native name also, but it's okay. Like, they're representative of their American generation. That's their culture. I know. I
But
love
again,
it for
like I said,
Peyton and Jaden.
because I said when Aiden goes to the military, Aiden is still going to be Aiden Bella. They'll even be calling him Bella from his last name because they don't use
Yeah.
first names. So, anyways, but like I said, that's just me. I'm very, very. It's yes, but it's a
No,
personal thing.
I hear you, but we have to remember these children are not good. They're American children. Let them be American. It's okay.
As for me and my household, I have to remind every day that you're not American.
Stop bullying that child. She's an American child, please. Americana. Okay. One thing that I don't know if it was written to be comical, but I found it funny, right? The different perspectives. So Winterbottom has said he's going to, I love pronouncing his name. He said he's going to appoint Izulu the paramount chief, and he sends for them to summon Izulu so that he can tell him. And again, this is the disconnect, because Izulu is sitting in his hut, and these messengers come like, Winterbottom has summoned you, and he's like, does he know who I am? Like, he's like, nah, go and tell him that he can, I'll send my son to take the message, because nobody summons Izulu. And of course they go back, and Winterbottom is like, okay, arrest him. So as he says that, whether it's malaria or whatever, he gets really sick, Winterbottom, and he gets admitted. Izulu finally agrees to go to see what they're calling him for, and it coincides with the time that Winterbottom is so sick that he's hospitalized. So now this rumor starts that Winterbottom has offended the chief priest, and look, now he's on his deathbed. So I found that like really, really funny, because in the native people's mind, they're like,
this is it.
And
like
the British people, they are just thinking on another.
Like, no, it's just a mosquito bit me, I have malaria, which tends to happen in these parts. Take some quinine. I'll be good.
Exactly. And then, so now Winterbottom gives Clark the assignment to tell Izulu that he's going to be assigned paramount chief. But Clark, too, is like, they should put Izulu in the guard room. He's basically telling them to imprison him. But the people who work for the colonial administrators, these are Igbo people. So they're like, of course, I'm not going to imprison
the
Izulu,
chief priest.
chief priest. So they go and like, they clean that room, like they put a mat on the floor, and they kind of present it to him like, oh, just stay here.
Manage this.
Yeah, they're not like presenting to him like he's being detained. They're like, oh, here, we're being hospitable, just stay in this room, my wife will cook for you and your son. And it's so funny, the different perspectives, because in Clark's head, he has imprisoned Izulu. And in Izulu's mind, he's like, they're just, putting me up in this room until the white man can see me and tell me what it is that he wants to. It's so funny, that difference in perspective. And the sicker Winterbottom gets, the more the rumors are spreading about Izulu and how he's this powerful chief priest, and the white man should have known not to mess with him. And Clark summons him, and he's like looking at Clark like, okay, this Winterbottom's small boy, and Clark is looking at him like, this disrespectful ass fetish priest. And they basically tell him, what it is that they want to do. And he's like, these people are mad. He's like, of course I'm not going to do it. So they detain him again, and they end up detaining him for what? Like, it was over 30 days.
Yes. Is it a month or 2 months?
Because 2 new moons passed.
That's what I was saying, yeah. So, how many months are there in a month?
Where? Apple, why are you showing balloons?
How many new moons are there in a month?
Well, a moon cycle is 28 days.
Okay, so I think, was it 2 months? Unless they got him, like, right at the...
Yeah. It could have been, anytime from 30 to 60 days. Depending on when he went in there.
Who used the lunar calendar. He missed 2 new moons.
Yeah, he definitely missed 2 new moons while he was being detained. And this is a problem for the people of Umora, because Izulu, as the chief priest, he's basically their calendar. I think every new moon
He eats yam.
He's supposed to make a sacrifice, right?
Yes. And then he has 12 yams, then he has to take
Mm-hmm.
one every new moon. And I guess when he runs out, that's when they do the New Yam Festival, I think.
Yes. Yeah. So
Damn.
at the beginning of the New Yam Festival, he starts with, 12 yams, right? And he's eating one every new moon, right? Or every month. And then when he eats the last one, that's when he knows that, okay, it's time for the next New Yam Festival. And then also every new moon, he's supposed to sacrifice kola nuts to Ulu, the god. So he has been
and
in
then
detention.
don't they all say a prayer when they see the new moon?
Yeah, when he announces
he announces that he has seen the moon. Because I remember the first time at the start of the book when he sees it, and then Matefi says the thing, and then the younger wife is like, I don't see it. Then when Matefi points it to her, she's like, oh, it looks evil.
So anyway, Ezulu is in detention. He has not made the 2 sacrifices to Ulu. The 2 new moons has passed. He has also not eaten the 2 yams, right? So by the time he goes back to his village, now this is a turn of events, because remember, before he left, people were really angry with him. First of all, his son Uduche, he sent his son to go and learn the white man's ways. His son imprisoned a python. He desecrated their sacred animal. Everybody's just angry with Ezulu. And then on top of that, they heard that Winterbota is summoning him. So they're looking at him like, are you friends? Are you friends with the white man? Why is he calling you? So he's not on good terms with his village people when he leaves. But when they hear this rumor that Winterbota is on his deathbed because Ezulu has basically cursed him, now they're like, okay,
you still got it.
You still got it. That's our chief priest right there. Okay. So he comes back to the village after he has been detained, and everybody's come to visit him in his house. He's having visitors. People are, even the men who were talking shit to him before he left.
What's that guy's name? Wako? It starts on N.
I know what you're talking about.
From the land. The one who just basically exists to
Yeah. All his haters yes. have to eat their words, basically. So he's on good terms, but then he goes and fucks shit up again because, remember, he has missed 2 new moons. He has not eaten those 2 yams. So now their calendar is off. It's time for the New Yam Festival. The yams are ripe and ready to be harvested. Izulu is now announcing the New Yam Festival. And everybody's like, wagwan. So they come to him, and he too, he's like we said in the beginning, he's a mean guy. And he's like, why are you questioning me?
You know who I am.
He's like, are you the one telling me?
Handpicked by Ulu himself. And I think you can't even sympathize with Izulu throughout this book, because in the beginning, he's having this internal monologue where he's thinking about all the power that comes with his position, but how he doesn't really use it. And what's his power if he does not use it? So he feels like, he should, wield his power more over the people. And then it's they say this in passing. There is a god that Obika, is it Obika who saw that god in lightning? Eru, I think that's the god's name, Eru. And I think it's the god of wealth or something. And the way that he talks about this is he wishes that he was a chief priest to that guy. So much affection and longing. So you can already tell, as much as he says that he wants to be principled and do things by the book, but he's also, I feel because there are no checks and balances, he's struggling with how far can he push the envelope? Is he practicing restraint? Do the people respect him? And all these things. But then he just does stupid things like this, and then you can't really sympathize with him anymore.
Yeah, because he's the people come and they're like, yo, our yams are going to get rotten in the ground. We need to harvest. It's time for New Yam Festival. And he's like, are you the one telling me the time, or am I telling you the time of the New Yam Festival? And they're like, okay. He's like, listen, I was in detention. Nobody sacrificed kola to Ulu. I still have 2 yams that I did not eat. What do you guys want me to do? And the men, they're like, go and eat the yams. We'll answer. If there's any wrath from Ulu, we'll bear it. And he's like, no, sorry, I cannot do that. They're like, okay, go and ask Ulu. We're sorry that we did not sacrifice the kola nut in the new moon. Go and ask your god. how we can make amends.
Make amends, yeah.
He goes and he comes back the next morning. He's like, he said, there's nothing you can do.
I mean, like, I think this was just a power trip because if you think about it logically, he should have known that there's cycles. These things happen in cycles. It's time to, like, what are you going to do? Starve the people? Because if they don't harvest their yams, it's going to rot. Then what do they do for the next year? It's not something that you're going to plant and harvest in 4 weeks.
Exactly. Now, this is where, I mean, I'm sure Zulu did not see this coming. He could not have foreseen this, but he should have. One of the Christian teachers, Good Country, he sees this opportunity and he's like, okay, perfect. I've been trying to tell these native people about this, their stupid God, and how they should turn to the one true God. So he tells them, like, hey, come and, because for New Yam Festival, they're supposed to take one yam and sacrifice it to Ulu, and then they can harvest the rest of their yams, and store and eat them for the rest of the year. So he's like, don't mind Ulu, come and sacrifice your yam to my God. Nothing will happen to you. Nothing will happen to you. Because the people are starving, like their yams are rotting in the ground. They want to eat. They have to go and buy foreign yams. Like, it's a mess. So he sees Good Country. He's like, this is the perfect opportunity. And Oduche, who is Ezulu's son, is in that church. And he knows that this is what Good Country is plotting. And he doesn't tell his dad.
I told you, that one was a lost soul. They chose the wrong child. They should have sent Obika in there, but he would have probably beaten somebody. Now, thinking about this, I wonder, is this how we have... I don't know if you did this. So, like, in Cameroon, I think in Catholic churches, in October, a lot of parishes celebrate Harvest Thanksgiving. And what it is like, especially people who... in rural areas, I think especially, they bring produce that you've harvested and you bring it to church in Thanksgiving and, like, blessings. But I wonder if there's, like, any relationship to... like New Yam Festival, that kind of thing.
It makes sense because one strategy for the Christian missionaries in some places was to basically
mimic
traditional practices and just say, okay, fine, you can keep doing that thing, just come and do it with this God, not that one.
Yeah, I think I know that for like Catholics in 85 is when Pope John Paul II like was really pushing heavily for Ecclesia in Africa, which is using the customs of the people in church.
So this is a patriarchal society, right? If you had not deduced by listening so far. But one thing that I found interesting, which you mentioned, was that one of Ezulu's daughters, she gets married to somebody in a neighboring village, and that man is abusive. He's beating her. So Obika, who is Ezulu's son, this girl's brother, he takes one of his drunkard friends, one of his hard-headed friends, and they go to that village and they beat that man up, the husband. They tie him and bring him back to their village. And the daughter leaves the house, as she comes back to her father's compound. And of course, the people of his village come and they're like trying to like talk shit, but they know they're on the wrong because, they know that their man was like abusive.
They said he went too far this time, or like he used a heavy hand too far this time. And I also want to point out that yes, like Matefi she tried to victim blame Akweke because she said she's the kind of person who went to her husband's house and wanted to be the man or something like that.
She said that?
She said something blaming her. Because when she came back, it's like, although she saw that she was bruised, it's like, but she's the kind of woman who went to the man's house and tried to, tell him what to do. Meanwhile, all Obika had to do was like, who did this to you? And it's like, say less.
Mm-hmm.
And called his friend. And I like his friend. He told his friend, like, don't touch anybody. And his friend is like, so what did you call me for? To hold your bag? And he's like,
his friend's ready to throw hands.
He said, no, I'll take care of him. But just in case word spreads and the men in the village come back, then you can take care of those.
So they whooped the husband's ass.
Whooped it. And then his village people, when they came, they said they waited like 1 month and nobody brought him back. So they were like, they had to come and find out for themselves. But yes, I think it was surprising the fact that they didn't come like with their chest out. They knew he was wrong from the time
Mm-hmm.
he came in, and even the fact that Izulu did not press his daughter to go back. I think they didn't
Mm-hmm.
even like bother to try to make amends. They just came to take their boy back home, and
Mm-hmm.
it was not a reconciliation tour.
And she was back in her father's compound for quite a while, I think like almost a year. And then her no good husband came, he came to beg Izulu, like, okay, like, can I take her back? And Izulu did not like say yes or no. He went and asked her, like, if she was ready to go back. And she said something like, oh, she'll go after the next new moon. That was, I'm assuming it's a realistic portrayal, right? Because
I think
everything
so, yeah.
else seems to be. But yeah, it was her decision whether she wanted to go back to her husband's compound. So even within this traditional patriarchal society, you still see her having agency to say, so basically, because she could have, it sounds like she had the power to divorce him if she wanted. Because if you leave your husband's house and you go to your father's house and you refuse to go back, that's a divorce, basically. So it sounds like women had agency to divorce their husbands.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know if it had to be this kind of abusive situation or if it was just like, I'm done with you.
I've seen stories of people sharing their grandmothers and great grandmothers' exploits on Twitter. And they said their grandmothers didn't divorce. They just used to leave the marriage and go shack up to the next person. And they didn't take their children.
Okay.
Oftentimes they didn't take the kids. I think that because taking the children, then you have the family talking about they're my children, like the children belong to the father or whatever. But they said a lot of their grandmothers, when they did not like the situation, they would just walk away.
Yeah, and you cannot really take your kids to another man's house,
Yeah.
So, yeah. This book reminded me of Crown of Thorns in that there are a lot of adages and proverbs in there. Towards the end, there's like a whole page when, spoiler alert, when Obika is about to die, like there's like 2 long paragraphs of proverbs, and I wrote down a couple. When a handshake goes beyond the elbow, we know it has turned to another thing. Another one that I love, it says, Bat knew his ugliness, so he chose to fly by night. And then the sleep that lasts from one market day to another has become death.
Yeah, there are a lot of proverbs.
Mm-hmm.
There were a lot that really tickled me. And it definitely was reminiscent of Crown of Thorns.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I would recommend this book because I feel like they don't make them like this anymore. Like this style of writing.
They don't.
They really don't. And that's not saying anything negative against modern African writers, but just this style of writing, I think, has gone out of fashion.
It's rare. It's rare. But I also think that these books, although it's fiction, it tells us a lot about what life was like in that time period. And we can see it also helps us understand certain things in the context of today. Because like I said, there's so many things that happen, like land issues. People are fighting their tribes that don't get along, and it feels like, oh, what is the matter? But you're looking at it within like the last 2 decades when it's a problem that has existed for over a century. So it helps to give context to a lot of things that are happening today in like a fun way.
Yeah, agree. And I like that he spends a lot of time talking about customs, traditions, their festivals, things that when you look at the context like of the plot, it really doesn't add anything to progress the plot, but it's important for him to kind of share that information. And I found it really, really interesting. So yeah, if you're somebody who, is curious about particularly Igbo, some of their festivities, cultures, spiritual beliefs, this would be a good book to read.
Yeah, I don't know if this is a real quote, but I'd seen it somewhere where they said Chinua Achebe, who's the author of the book, always said that he was an Igbo man first before he was Nigerian. Because, Igbo culture and belief systems have existed for centuries, but Nigeria, the country, was fairly new at the time.
And another author whose work this book reminds me of, Flora Nwapa. She writes in that same way where she emphasizes like culture and traditions, even maybe above the plot of the story.
Yeah. And I think it gives you a better understanding. At least reading it now, it gives me a better understanding and just explaining certain customs and things that I might have heard about in passing, it adds more context.
Yeah, agree. Definitely agree. Okay. Well, like I said, this is our penultimate episode. We got one more to go to close out season 2, and then we'll be taking a break and coming back, hopefully, for season 3 sometime next year. But in the meantime, you should keep up with us on Instagram at 2bspod. You can catch up on old episodes on your favorite podcast platform or on YouTube at 2Bs in a Pod. And until next time,
when a handshake goes beyond the elbow, we know it has turned to another thing. This one is simple. It's like I interpret it as like give somebody, you reach out to give a handshake and they want a kiss.
Mm-hmm. Or you give somebody an inch and they want a mile.
Yeah. So takers will always take. Or if you don't set boundaries, people are going to push as much as they can.
Agree.